Last week, the Cardinals cut Yohel Pozo from their roster. Now news coming down that they're signing him to a contract. What's going on here? Why did the Cardinals do it this way? And what does it mean for the other catchers heading into 2026? We'll explain coming up on b-schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Monday, November 24th, 2025, and there was some news over the weekend, late last week, as it pertains to the Cardinals' 40-man roster. We already knew and talked about on the show how the Cardinals had let Yohel Pozo go as part of their maneuvering ahead of the Rule 5 draft. Well, there was a new deadline late last week that pertained to the 40-man roster and whether or not the Cardinals would tender contract offers to various players on it. And if they choose not to do so, those players would become immediate free agents. It's a little bit different than putting a player on waivers, doing a designated for assignment type of scenario. It's basically, hey, whatever the player would make as a member of the 40-man roster, we're not even tendering him an offer of a contract, and therefore he is an immediate free agent. The Cardinals did that with 3 additional players beyond the Yohel Pozo move. They non-tendered Sem Robberse, who is a right-handed pitcher prospect that came over in July of 2023, I believe it was, trade with the Blue Jays. Adam Kloffenstein, who had been sent to greener pastures previous to this. Sem Robberse now suffering the same fate. He was recovering from Tommy John surgery. The Cardinals have other guys on their 40-man roster to whom that applies. Tekoa Roby and Cooper Jerpy also in that situation. So I think from just a logistics standpoint, this was a move that didn't surprise me a whole heck of a lot as it pertains to Robberse. They just probably didn't have the space on the 40-man with all the other machinations and moves that are happening to be able to house that number of guys who just aren't going to be available to them at the beginning of the year to pitch. And I think from a stuff standpoint, a competitive standpoint, I know that Sem Robberse was injured, and so that was part of the reason that maybe he was so bad last spring, but he really struggled in Jupiter in Grapefruit League play last spring. So not super surprised to see that move. Push came to shove. In an ideal world, you're able to hold on to those guys through their recoveries and figure out a way to maybe get the most out of them. It just probably wasn't going to happen with Sem Robberse. John King, that's a name that you know, left-handed reliever from the Cardinals roster and in their bullpen last year and the previous season as well. He is also departed. Came over in that same trade deadline too, if I'm recalling correctly, the 2023 deadline. I believe he came from the Rangers in the same deal that brought Thomas Saggese here, the Jordan Montgomery trade. John King was getting into the arbitration eligibility just a little bit too deep. He was projected by MLB trade rumors to make $2.1 million, and so that just was not going to be worthwhile for the production that he was giving the Cardinals, and so they cast him aside. The guy we want to talk about a little bit more here, though, and we could discuss those other names in future videos if you guys would like to hear more about my thoughts on them. We also talked about him last week with Joe Roderick and STL Sports Central. Yohel Pozo is the name that I want to touch on because he was part of this where he was non-tendered, not given a contract offer, so he's off the 40-man roster. But it also meant he wasn't being passed through waivers, and so another team was not going to be able to claim him with the way that the Cardinals did this. If it had happened during the same period that Yohel Pozo was let go, it could have maybe been a little bit of a different circumstance with regard to that. The reason this ends up being relevant is because, according to Derek Gould, the Cardinals are already signing Yohel Pozo back to the organization. And so you would say, well, they just cut him last week. Now they're bringing him back. What gives? It's really about the 40-man roster and the flexibility that this affords the Cardinals. Because if you had Yohel Pozo as part of your 40-man roster, he would have been the 5th catcher on that roster, and you just don't realistically need that. But you do need depth throughout your organization. You need catchers to be filling out the rosters in AA, AAA, etc. You also just need guys coming into spring training and catching all of those pitchers, those arms that you have during the first early days of spring. Yohel Pozo, I think, is going to be more than just a glorified backstop down at spring training. I do think the Cardinals would like to consider him as part of their depth at the catcher position, and it's a move that makes sense for Yohel Pozo if you are beloved in that clubhouse. They enjoy having you around. The teammates love you. You love being here. You were given an opportunity to play big league ball last year, and in a circumstance where maybe not a lot of other teams were calling on you. And so, yes, disappointing news, you're off the 40-man roster, but when the Cardinals turn right around and say, hey, we'd like to bring you back, Yohel, and we'll do it right away, it's just not going to be on a major league deal. If you're Pozo, you could, try to float around and ask your agent, is there any interest in me for a major league contract? Could I get on another 40-man roster? Or you could say, oh, the Cardinals are offering this. I like being a member of the Cardinals, and so I am going to sign that deal and agree to come back on a minor league contract with St. Louis. I think that's the benefit of it from Yohel Pozo's perspective is, not having to go through the winter of uncertainty, and then maybe the Cardinals make some different decisions with regard to their catching situation, and suddenly that offer that was there in November may not be there in January or February. The Cardinals get the benefit of kind of knowing what sits behind their crop of 4 catchers on the 40-man roster. As it stands now, my expectation would be that Yohel Pozo would most likely be a backup at Memphis, not necessarily playing a whole heck of a lot. Kind of going from a backup in the big leagues to not even the starter in AAA might be a little bit of a regression. But he is a great insurance policy, I think, for what the Cardinals are looking to do with the catcher position in 2026. Let's talk about it right now on the 40-man roster, because I can understand this is a confusing circumstance. A lot of people wondering exactly what we've talked about. Well, why would you get rid of him if you wanted to bring him back? Procedurally, it made sense for the Cardinals to not have a 5th catcher on the 40-man. They do seem to like Yohel Pozo, but no, I don't believe he had a ton of interest from other teams around the league. There might have been other teams that would have been willing to bring him in as depth, similar to the way that the Cardinals have done, but he also has the familiarity with the Cardinals and knows, hey, if I'm with the Cardinals, they like me, and I could potentially be right back in this situation next year where I'm getting a big league opportunity depending on how things go. So let's talk about that. The 4 catchers on the 40-man are Ivan Herrera, Pedro Pages, Jimmy Crooks, and Leonardo Bernal. Bernal was added just over the past week because the Cardinals wanted to protect one of their top prospects from the Rule 5 draft. And so he's on the 40-man now, but he was only the catcher at AA Springfield last year. So as much as I would say of the 4, the one that I think by 2027 could most legitimately be the Cardinals' everyday starter behind the plate is probably Leonardo Bernal. I think has the upside to do that, both defensively as a minor league Gold Glove winner and in a bat that could continue to progress. I do believe the Cardinals really like him. But he's never set foot in AAA just yet, and so I would think that it would make sense for him to be the primary at AAA to begin 2026. But you also have Jimmy Crooks. Okay, how does he fit into this puzzle could very well decide what the Cardinals do with the other positions and a guy like Pedro Pages. I've seen it on social media this morning, people going, well, if this is happening and the Cardinals are bringing Pozo back, it obviously means they're going to trade Pedro Pages. I do not believe that it necessarily means that. I think it is more appropriate to view the Pozo news as, and by the way, if I am talking quickly and say Pozo, Pages, and I mix them up, just try to follow and know that my heart's in the right place with it. But with the Pozo news that he's coming back, I don't actually think that has a lot of bearing on Pedro Pages, because if the Cardinals liked and valued the contributions of Pozo ahead of Pedro Pages, they wouldn't have cut Pozo last week, and they did. Pozo's still part of the team, part of the organization. I expect he'll be there in spring training. But I think Pedro Pages is on a different level, and a level that within the Cardinals organization is given consideration beyond maybe what the fans give him. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. 2026, Ivan Herrera going back behind the plate after we had sort of said all 2025. It's not really looking like it's going to work out. The multiple lower body injuries and trying to figure out a way to keep his knees healthy, while also making sure the Cardinals are getting the production from his bat, which is the part that makes Ivan Herrera most successful as a big leaguer to this point. Does it really make a lot of sense for the Cardinals to long-term be hitching their wagon to Ivan Herrera catching? Maybe not, but it also would be to their benefit if he would figure it out and successfully be able to man that role defensively while also providing the value that he does at the plate. That would help the Cardinals in a lot of ways. It would basically be 2 really valuable players into one, someone who can do a nice job catching, who can also hit like Ivan Herrera can. That's valuable to the Cardinals. It would also be valuable to another MLB team as Ivan Herrera gets a little bit deeper into his career, and we're not sure exactly how long this rebuild is going to take for the Cardinals. He would be somebody with a ton of trade value down the road if you should decide that maybe Leonardo Bernal is ready to be your catcher and we can move on from the other player. Or Rangel Rodriguez, even further down the road, a power-hitting catcher prospect who is also making his way through the Cardinals organization. In a 2026 where we don't really think the Cardinals are going to make the playoffs or can't reasonably expect them to do so with the way they'll be handling the roster and the payroll and things of that nature, it makes all the sense in the world to give it a try, especially for Herrera coming off of an elbow surgery where maybe that allows for him to make up some of the deficiencies in his throwing arm after he recovers from that. So the Cardinals are going to give that a go. But I don't think you can realistically pencil in Ivan Herrera to just catch 120 games like any starting catcher or even 110 games like you would expect of a primary backstop for a big league club. I think the number is going to be lower than that. I think his injury history, I think the fact that we're not really sure how he'll hold up at the plate if he's catching that many games at a big league setting, the work that has to be put in behind the scenes, the type of stuff that they really believe in Pedro Pages already to do and believe that he does very effectively is kind of the growth curve that Ivan Herrera would be looking to embark upon for 2026. And like I said, maybe he does it successfully and the Cardinals are better off for it. But none of this happens in a vacuum. You have to wait and see how a guy is going to perform in his role before you can determine what it means for everybody around him. Right now, as I have maintained ever since the end of the season, as people really going back to last season at the beginning of the year, people were ready to write off Pedro Pages. And I said the Cardinals are not ready to do that. He is going to be an important part of what they do, and he'll catch a bunch of games. That was going to be true even before the Ivan Herrera injuries, and it was certainly true after them. I think Pedro Pages is in the spot where he is perfect for what the Cardinals are looking to do with Herrera, because if that falls through and it doesn't go the way that they're hoping it will with Herrera defensively, you can at least fall back on a guy in Pages who can handle the pitching staff, who can, not necessarily set back the development of some of the young pitchers that you are hoping to be able to make their way until you're really sure what you've got in Jimmy Crooks. Jimmy Crooks is a guy that I think could turn into a really fine big league catcher. We have not seen it yet, though. And I think the Cardinals, in order to feel comfortable saying, yes, we can arrange our roster in such a way that allows for Jimmy Crooks to be the backup at the big league level and catch 40, 50, 60, 70 games in a big league season as the starter in the event that Ivan Herrera needs every third day off from behind the plate so that he can keep his knees fresh, so that he can continue to stay in the lineup as a DH. It won't be like a normal catcher who just would have a full day off when he's off. The Cardinals are going to want his bat in the lineup as much as possible, which is a tough line to straddle when you're trying to also make him a catcher on an everyday basis. So it'll be interesting to see the way that it plays out for Herrera, and I'm not predicting that it will work or won't work. I just think until you see more of it from Herrera, if you're the Cardinals, no, I do not believe, as I've seen it suggested, that the Pozo news from Monday suggests the Cardinals are about to trade Pedro Pages. I feel like that's putting the cart before the horse and getting the order of operations wrong on a move that is more of a minor move to assure depth behind a murky situation. The Cardinals are in a situation where Pozo wants to be here, and so they can kind of use him, although they found him to be expendable as a member of the 40-man roster. There's value in having him as part of the organization in general, and that's how they're going to be able to use Pozo here. If it works great for Herrera, then you can say, all right, maybe Pedro Pages is not as necessary as part of the organization if you're getting a really good offer for him, because Herrera's going well and the backup catcher is going to be a more minimized role. Maybe Crooks can handle that. Maybe it can simply be Pozo when the time comes if you need it to be. Maybe Jimmy Crooks comes into spring training and he looks fantastic and he's taken to heart all of the things that the Cardinals have wanted him to improve upon, to where they feel like, yeah, they could hand over the reins to him as the major league starter if something should happen to Ivan Herrera or if things don't go well. But I don't think the Cardinals are necessarily there yet with Jimmy Crooks, and I don't realistically think they can be there until they at least see him in spring training.
So that's why I would throw some cold water on the notion that a re-signing of Pozo to a minor league contract somehow signifies that the Cardinals are about to trade Pedro Pages. I don't think the Cardinals know what they would need to know just yet to be willing to move on from Pedro Pages. They don't know what they need to know about Crooks. They don't necessarily know what the timeline is for Bernal. They want to see more of that. I think a lot of that comes in spring training, but Pages is the perfect insurance policy for 2026 on the progress of Herrera and the progress of Jimmy Crooks. And I'm not saying that he's reduced to only being that if you're Pedro Pages. Like, Pedro Pages could improve at the plate. You know, it took Yadier Molina several years in the big leagues before we saw him really come to as an offensive contributor as well. And so maybe that's the trajectory for Pages, and Pages ends up putting together a league average offensive season and continues to improve as a receiver. And then suddenly people are talking about Pedro Pages as the Cardinals catcher. I don't think many Cardinals fans anticipate it going that way, but I'm just pointing it out to suggest that we shouldn't overreact to this Pozo news. It's a no-brainer if you're the Cardinals. If he wanted to be back and was willing to do it this early in the process, so you have all the depth you could need at that position. Yes, I would say today it's very difficult to answer the question of, okay, Brenden, well, what does that mean? Who's on the Major League roster to begin the season at catcher? Because I don't know for sure. But could I envision a world in which, because of the unique nature of Herrera and the fact that he's the team's best hitter, that would embolden the Cardinals to carry a third catcher? And do not mention the name of Wilson Contreras. He does not count as a catcher at this stage of the game. Yeah, I would say that that's a possibility, that we go into the season seeing Herrera be the primary, Pages be a backup that gets some rather significant run relative to what some other backups around the league get, because we'll see Herrera serve as a DH on some of his days just to keep the bat in the lineup. And then we potentially see a third string Jimmy Crooks, or the Cardinals, go through spring training and don't believe Crooks is ready for that, or they believe he would be better served to continue catching in AAA so he can improve to maybe become an MLB caliber guy someday and work on some of those things. And maybe there's a 40-man spot because a pitcher gets hurt and he's on the 60-day IL, and they add Pozo back because he's the one that makes sense to be the third catcher in the big leagues if you're going to have three, more so than a prospect like Crooks. Like, all these things could happen. Pages could get traded. I mean, you could get to a point where another team has a catcher injury in March, and Crooks looks like a stud, and he drops a little weight, and he looks like the full package as a catcher, and they want him to be starting 60 games to Herrera's 100 in the big leagues next year. And they are like, yeah, we got a great trade offer for Pedro Pages that values him the way that we value him. And so the piece we got back is a really good one. And so then you do trade him. But I think if you're looking for the tea leaves and saying that the Pozo deal now means that Pages is on the trade block any more than he would have been yesterday, I do not necessarily agree with that. I think it's more about the development of the two prospects and not necessarily knowing exactly what you're going to get from Crooks or Herrera at this point in time. So Pozo is a guy that makes sense as a luxury, as depth at an important position on the diamond. That's what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and appreciate you guys for tuning in. We will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.